No tree is just a tree. Trees carry theology in their veins. Amongst God's wild and good creation, with branches stretched to the heavens in praise and roots deep in the soil, only trees connect heaven and earth. A tree is a visual shorthand, a symbol of God's redemption story. The tree of knowledge of good and evil, the tree of life, the tree for the healing of the nations, and Jesus' cross, which is sometimes called a tree. These are all positive symbols of God's intention, bearing witness to God's story. Trees remind us of God's patience, steadfast, generous and accepting, and of God's action in our world with their immense bounty of seed and fruit and flower and shade, of benefits to the soil, to the air, to the water, and to the thousands of creatures that use them for habitat. I think about trees a lot. I hate to see them chopped down, and I feel bad that I burn them for heating and chop them up for construction. My consolation is that they are replaceable and regenerative, and that people like my daughter are ensuring the proliferation of new plantations. The tree is also a metaphor I often think about. Let me walk you through some trees and use them as a metaphor of the church as it appears in Australia today.
This red gum looks like it's on a bit of a lean, and it looks like it needs something to hold it up. I mean, look at that. It's got something to hold it up. But the very thing that's holding it up is the thing that will destroy it. The termite mound has been built at the bottom. A beautiful mud pile there. It's not built there to support the church. It's actually undermining it. To support the tree, I should say. And sometimes people think they bring in things that are external that they think will help the church. Let's bring in more entertainment. Let's bring in gambling to raise money for the church, whatever it might be. But in the end, those things can white ant the tree, white ant the church, and cause it to fall in the end. Here's a little red gum tree. Doesn't look too bad. It's got a few dead limbs, but it's got a serious problem. Once again, this tree has been undermined by a wombat hole, and there's a decent hole in this tree. It goes right in under there. You could hide a runaway child in there, and it comes out the other side. So the hole probably goes the full length under the tree, undermining it. You can see the scratch marks of the wombat's claws on the side of the mud there. So this beautiful little tree, unfortunately, has probably not got a long life because it's been undermined at the roots. That's evocative, isn't it?
What kinds of alien forces are undermining the church? Maybe things like this virus that we're experiencing. That's certainly shaking things up a lot. Or maybe it's the attacks of our atheistic education system or of cynical entertainers. Or maybe it's the bad behaviour of representatives of the church. Whatever, we can survive such attacks upon the church, such undermining, if we name it and face it and confront it by the grace of God.
This is the beautiful bark of a red stringy bark tree. There's not many of them around, but there's quite a clump of them here in Alexandra, in Mackenzie Reserve. And some of them look okay, but quite a few of them have died. Look at all the dead branches. And here's one there that's completely dead. There's a few more around the same. And it seems that in the Murrindindi Shire, the climate has just changed enough to make red stringy bark trees really struggle to survive. A few live leaves, but many, many dead branches. The poor old tree, magnificent old tree, is dying off. What does it take for a tree to remain healthy?
So the stringy bark will adapt. What happens when the climate changes is that some trees die out in the warmed up areas, and then they recolonise in areas that are cooler, maybe higher altitude or further south. They have to adapt or die. And it's like that with the church, isn't it? The climate for church has changed from what it was 100 years ago. And if we don't adapt, if we don't change, we too will die. But I think we can learn from the stringy bark. We can make the adaptation, and our populations can survive.
This beautiful tree has fallen. It's an island in the middle of the wetlands called Cummins Lagoon, and this tree stood tall for hundreds of years. It had many hollows in it. I saw ducks nesting in this tree, and then I saw the wood ducks finish nesting, and I saw cockatoos come and use the same hollow a little bit later. And now it has fallen. It's a great shame, but this will not be the end of the life of this tree.
Its great dead form will continue to provide perches for cormorants and herons, and its leaves and branches will be habitat and food for freshwater creatures. It's like the church. Sometimes institutions within the church will die. Like we don't see cathedrals and monasteries being built anymore. But that doesn't mean it's the end of the useful life of the church. There will be new forms and new ways that the church will be a blessing to its community, and it will continue to provide habitat and hope for the community for years.
Old trees fall and die, that's one thing. But this week they chopped down the last of the beautiful, not the last, but one of the last of the beautiful old red gums on this estate. It was a perfect tree, full health, hundreds of years old. You can see by the timber how healthy it was. And because of fear that it might inconvenience the landowners who were going to build a house here, they murdered the tree. I was depressed for 2 days as I could hear the chainsaws chopping away. Well, that's progress for you.
From the tree of life in the Garden of Eden through to the same tree in the new creation, we see that God's plan is to bless, sustain, heal, and abide with us forever. When I touch a huge old tree or lean on it, it lifts my heart up. The richness of creation and the promise of new creation are revealed to me. And when people cut down a tree needlessly, in my opinion, it speaks of humanity's bad behaviour in the world, the careless, exploitative, wasteful and damaging ways that we walk on this earth. In loving trees, I find instead a metaphor for God's call to a new way of life, the hope for the new creation, to live kindly, thankfully, trustingly, hopefully.